The year was 1874, and winter had seized the frontier with a merciless hand. Snow had drifted so deep it muffled sounds, absorbed colors, and seemed to bury even hope. The wind cut through the town streets like a blade, carrying with it the pain of hunger and the sting of judgment. In that cold, amidst the white swirling, a young widow stood, her 3 children huddled against her skirts, their breath a mist in the frigid air. Mary Lincarter Scholl was dressed in threadbare clothes. Her boots were cracked, and yet in her trembling hand, she clutched the only thing she had left of her past life, a simple gold wedding band. Her fingers shook as she held it out to the shopkeeper in the general store, the lamp's light glinting dully on the circle of worn gold. "Please," she whispered, her voice more like the wind than a sound. "My children haven't eaten in 3 days. Will you buy it?" The words came out harsh, laced with shame. Her eldest, Sarah, only 8, tried to stand straighter, her chin lifted as if to shield her mother from the sting of begging. But hunger had hollowed her eyes, making her too small for such bravery. Tommy, at 6, leaned into Mary's side, his thin arms wrapped around her leg, his teeth chattering despite the wool cap pulled low over his ears. Lissa, the youngest, just 3, slumped heavily in her mother's other arm, her face pale, her lips chapped. The shopkeeper, a fleshy man with a stubbled chin, looked at the ring, then at Mary, a sneer twisting his mouth. "A trinket, not worth a loaf of bread to me." He turned away, dismissing her, his words carrying easily through the glass-paned door to the street. To women passing by paused, whispering behind gloved hands, their eyes sweeping over Mary with contempt. One muttered, "Done for, poor thing." The other replied, "Shameless, begging in broad daylight." Mary's face burned, though the wind was icy. Pride warred with desperation. She wanted to turn, to gather her children, and disappear into the snow. But Sarah's small hand gripped hers, a silent plea for food, for a hope. Mary tried again, her voice wavering. "It's my wedding band. It must be worth something." The shopkeeper only snorted. "Best keep it for memory's sake. No man'll give you money for a thing tied to another's failure." His eyes slid meaningfully to her children. The shame washed over her like a heavy, suffocating wave. She pulled the little ones closer, her chest tight with helplessness. It was then that another figure emerged from the shadows of the boardwalk. A tall silhouette in a wool coat, his hat brim pulled low, his boots worn but solid. John Martin was not known as a talkative man. He lived high in the mountains, alone since death had taken his wife 2 winters ago. He looked like a man tempered by storms, both outside and in, strong and broad-shouldered, yet marked by solitude. His eyes, grey as the winter sky, settled not on the gossiping women, nor on the shopkeeper, but on Mary and her children. For a long moment, he simply stood and watched. Then, in a voice that was low and even, he asked, "How long have they been without food?" His question cut through the sneers like an axe splitting wood. Mary's throat tightened. Admitting the truth felt like laying bare her soul. 3 days, she said at last, each word tasting like ash. John's jaw tightened. Without another word, he walked past her into the diner across the street, the bell above the door jingling. The townspeople exchanged glances, some sneering, some curious. Mary, stunned, held her children close and turned to follow, hesitant, afraid of what this kindness might cost. But hunger drove her forward. Inside, a wave of warmth washed over her, carrying the scent of bacon and coffee. The children blinked, their eyes wide in the lantern light. John had already taken a table in the corner, his hat resting beside him, and he gestured to an empty bench. "Sit," he said, simply. Mary hesitated, the sting of pride still fresh, but Lissa whimpered softly, her small head heavy on her mother's shoulder. She sat, arranging the children around her. John raised a hand, and soon, steaming bowls of stew were set before them. Bread, still warm from the oven, was placed in the center. Mary stared, her throat constricted. "Eat," John said, his gaze steady. The children needed no prompting. Sarah reached first, breaking off a piece of bread and passing it to her siblings, before taking a bite herself. Tommy's hands trembled as he lifted the spoon, and tears ran down his cheeks as the first bite touched his tongue. Lissa made small sounds of relief, burrowing into her mother's sleeve as she ate. Mary couldn't stop the tears that blurred her vision, but she clamped her lips shut, refusing to let a sob escape. She looked up at John, and in his face, she saw not mockery, not pity, but only the quiet sorrow of a man who understood emptiness. He waited until the children had eaten before he touched his own bowl. The diner was a whisper. "Martin's taken up with a beggar," someone muttered. "Another mouth for him to feed," another said with a sneer. Mary heard every word, each one a needle piercing her thin armor. She stirred, ready to gather her children and flee. But John's voice, solid and calm, stopped her. "They're eating," he said aloud, not looking at anyone else, as if that one simple truth was enough to silence the judgment. For a moment, it was. When the bowls were empty and the children were dozing from the warmth, Mary tried to stand. "We'll go," she murmured, her voice thick with a shame and gratitude she didn't know how to balance. But John's hand reached across the table, broad and scarred, and lay not on hers, but close enough for the message to be clear. "Heavy snow coming down tonight. My cabin is close by. You'll freeze out here." Mary's breath caught. The offer was a lifeline thrown across a chasm of despair, but it was also terrifying. To accept was to step into the unknown, into another man's world, under the judgment of every watching eye. She looked at her children, Sarah's tired resolve, Tommy's fragile hope, Liss's head already drooping with exhaustion. They looked at her, waiting. The diner seemed to disappear. The whispers, the clatter, the storm rattling the windows. All that was left was the weight of John's words and the thud of her own heart. Mary squeezed her fingers tighter around the ring. She still held it, the last remnant of a life gone. Perhaps it was no longer a symbol of the past, but the key to whatever future might still be possible. She looked up at John, grey meeting grey, and the unspoken question hung between them like a breath in the cold. Would she trust him, or would she go back into the snow? The snow fell like ash from the heavens, soft but unending, as John Martin led Mary Lynn and her children through the storm. The lantern he carried cast a wavering gold circle on the drifts, his breath pluming in the dark. Mary stumbled once, her skirts heavy with rime, and he silently steadied her with a hand, his grip strong and sure. Behind her, Sarah clung to Tommy's hand, their small boots crunching in unison, while little Lissa hung heavy on Mary's shoulder. The cold bit into their bones, but ahead, through the veil of snow, the silhouette of a cabin grew, squat, weathered, and waiting, its chimney puffing smoke into the night. Inside, they were met with warmth, a rush of light from the fire. The air was thick with the scent of wood smoke and the simmering meat of a black iron pot. Mary blinked, disoriented, as John closed the door, shutting out the howl of the wind. The sudden silence pressed on her ears, broken only by the crackle of the flames. He moved without fuss, laying blankets near the hearth, his hands gentle as if he were setting out sacred offerings. The children huddled close to the fire, their cheeks thawing, a light steam rising from their damp clothes. Mary laid Lissa on a blanket, smoothing the child's tangled hair, her heart aching with gratitude and shame. John ladled stew into tin bowls and set them before the children. They ate ravenously, but he said nothing, only sitting close enough to watch, his own bowl untouched until theirs were half empty. Mary's eyes darted to his, searching for a motive, a hint of pity or desire, but his face was unreadable, marked with the quiet patience of a man who carried his own ghosts. She hugged her knees, pulling her shawl tighter, and whispered a prayer of thanks she hadn't uttered since her husband's funeral. That night, as the children slept, wrapped in blankets, Mary lay unsleeping on the floor, her back to the fire's warmth. Sleep would not come, for silence has a way of bringing fear to the surface. From a corner of the cabin, she heard John's voice, low and rough, carried by the crackle of the flame. He was praying, not for himself, but for the strength to carry the weight of his loneliness, for the courage to open a door that had long been closed. Mary pressed a hand to her lips, tears tracing a path down her cheek. She understood then that his solitude matched her own, though each of them wore it in a different way. The morning came grey and heavy. Snow lay in deep drifts against the cabin walls. John was chopping wood outside. Each strike of his axe rang sharp in the cold. Mary watched from the doorway. Lissa sat on her hip. He worked in a steady rhythm, muscles bunched under his shirt, each blow a statement of his fortitude. For a moment, she saw what a life beside him might mean. Not ease, but a solidity, the kind that could anchor even the most storm-torn heart. Yet, a fear coiled inside her. Fear of the gossip, of a debt she could never repay, of not belonging anywhere. When John returned, stacking the logs near the fire, she tried to speak. "We can't stay long. People will talk." The words burned her tongue as they left it. His eyes, grey as ice, lifted to hers. "Let them talk," he said simply, and nothing more. It wasn't anger, not even a challenge, but something heavier, a truth that did not require agreement. She dropped her gaze, shamed, her heart pounding at the thought of him bearing the town's scorn because of her. The gossip did come. When John went to town for flour, he heard it plain. Men shook their heads. Women scoffed about the beggar woman and her brood. She be his ruin, someone muttered. Martin's lost his mind. John's jaw tightened, but he said nothing until he was out on the boardwalk where the talk was loudest. Then, in a steady voice, he spoke words few expected. "Mary Lynn Carter and her children are under my roof. They will not be hurt, nor hungry, nor cold. Say what you will of me, but they will have my protection." A silence, like that after a snowfall, settled over the words. No one met his gaze. He turned and walked away, his boots hitting the boards like hammers. Mary learned of it later, her face burning as if she stood naked before the town. She wanted to gather their few things and leave, to spare him the shame. But as she gathered her shawl and the children's mittens, John stopped her with a hand pressed to the door. His eyes met hers, solid as stone. He didn't plead or command. He only said, "It's warm inside. Don't go into the cold." His hand lingered for a moment on the edge of her sleeve before he removed it. That touch, no more than a breath, bound her tighter than chains. The days passed in the quiet of the snowfall. Mary mended clothes with borrowed thread, scrubbed the wooden table, and tried to repay the debt in small ways that never seemed enough. The children laughed again, softly at first, then bright, as if life had returned to them. Sarah helped John carry water, her small arms straining, while Tommy followed him like a shadow, his eyes wide with admiration. Lissa, toddling by the hearth, learned to call him Papa, in a voice so sweet it made Mary's chest ache. She gently chided her, but John only smiled, a faint curve of his lips, as if the word had planted something in him he had long buried. Still, Mary's fear lurked, festering. One night, when the storm was at its fiercest, she woke in a panic, convinced she and the children had overstayed their welcome, that she was a burden dragging him down. Quietly, she wrapped the children in blankets, took the ring still tucked in her pocket, and tried to slip out into the storm. The wind tore at her skirts, the snow stung her face, and the darkness swallowed her steps. Sarah cried out, clinging to her, while Tommy stumbled in the drifts, and Lissa whimpered in confusion. Behind them, boots clattered on the stoop. John's voice cut through the storm, furious and raw. "Mary." He strode into the gale, snow clinging to his shoulders, the lantern light shaking in his hand. When he reached her, he grabbed her arm, pulling her against his chest. "You'll die out here," he said, his voice shaking with more than just the cold. She wept against him, the words pouring out like a confession. I thought I was your ruin. I thought they would laugh you into dust because of me." His hand cupped the back of her head, solid, unyielding. "Let them laugh," he whispered fiercely. "Don't run anymore. You and these children you're mine to keep safe now." The storm howled, but in his embrace, Mary felt the first warmth of belonging since widowhood had taken it. When dawn came, pale and silent after the blizzard's rage, the townspeople gathered in the chapel. It was a simple wedding, No ribbons or lace, only vows spoken in steady voices, the children holding hands. John stood tall, a pride in his eyes, as Mary became his wife, not out of desperation, but with a dignity newly found. The gossip had ceased, replaced by the quiet of something stronger than scorn respect. And so, in the heart of winter, hunger and shame gave way to a fire and a home. Mary's ring, once in her mind given up for bread, now shone again on her hand, brighter for all it had endured. The children laughed under the chapel eaves, their voices ringing out like bells over the snow. Remember this, dear soul. Love does not always come as thunder or applause. Sometimes it comes as a hand extended in a blizzard, a fire built in silence, a vow spoken not to a crowd, but to God and the wind. And when two broken hearts decide to hold one another through the cold, the very West must bow its head. For there is nothing stronger than a love earned through hunger, shame, and the fire within.